Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is Cullen Bunn. He needs an introduction for all of us that are comic book fans. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. Now, for everyone listening that may not be familiar with your dossier and your bibliography, how would you sum up your career so far?
I've at this point, I've written comics for just about every publisher. I write a lot of, I've written a lot for Marvel. So everything from Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe to Uncanny X-Men to Magneto to Fearless Defenders to Venom. And then I've written for DC. I wrote Sinestro and Lobo and some other books for DC. And then I've written a lot of creator-owned books like Harrow County and The Sixth Gun. And all throughout this, I've worked on a number of different, licensed and creator-owned projects along the way.
Yeah, and one of the favorite things, and probably one you're probably up there for one of my favorite people in the comic industry, is when you write for, it seems like all the people that no one really likes, but by the end of your story, everyone seems to have like a soft spot. Sinestro especially. All
right, I was gonna ask, who don't you like that I made you like? Yeah, Sinestro was a lot of fun. That was I liked writing that book. It was an interesting time in my life because I was writing both Sinestro and Magneto at the same time. So I was writing two books about villainous characters, anti-heroes at best. But Sinestro was interesting to me because I never wanted him to get into the anti-hero realm. I always wanted it to be that he's a villain. But if readers like him, even though despite his villainous nature, that's all good. But he was never intended to be a hero by any means.
No, and I think that's what made it more fun to read. Because when you look at his history as a character, I mean, he betrayed all of his friends for power. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's just the plain cold hard facts.
Right. Yeah. There's no gray area there.
No, not at all. Now, with this illustrious career and kind of being in and out with so many different publishers, was this? I mean, if we had to go back in time, was this always kind of the career path as you were growing up?
I guess I always loved comics. From a young age, I was writing and drawing my own comics. And even as early as like 6th grade, I was setting up and selling comics at little comic book conventions. Yeah, I was writing and drawing my own comics and, hand stapling them and selling them at little comic conventions around my area. So I always had that sort of that itch to tell stories and in one way or the other. And then it just took me a long time to actually figure out how to make that happen professionally.
So writing was kind of something you started pretty early on and got carried with you.
Yeah, I always wanted to write, always wanted to tell stories. I didn't care if it was comic. I mean, I loved comics, so that was something I wanted to do. But I also didn't care if it was comics, short stories, novels. I didn't care as long as I was, telling stories.
Yeah. I've always been interested, I guess, from writer perspectives. I'm assuming when you kind of went to either higher education or started into the career, was it immediately like you jumped in the comic books, or was it at some point you maybe wanted to dabble in kind of novel writing or short story writing just to see if that suited you better, considering you had such an extensive background in comics already?
Well, I went to when I went to school, I went to college. I went for a creative writing degree, and that's what I earned my degree in. And at the time, comic books was not something. Nowadays, universities have comic book writing classes and things like that. We didn't have that when I was in college, and also I didn't really understand how to submit comic book work to publishers. I knew how to submit magazine articles. I knew how to submit short stories, but novels. I didn't know how to submit comic books. So I leaned into short stories and fiction, prose fiction, much more heavily early on. And then later, as I finally figured out how to get into comics, then I leaned into that a little more heavily.
Awesome. Now, do you remember the first time that you kind of got that approval where they said, you know what, we like what you did here. Like we're going to hire you on to write a story. And what was that moment like?
Yeah. I mean, I had done a few like little, and if you're talking about comics in particular, I had done a few small comics, for like, real small press stuff, like short stories, 6-pagers and things like that. But my friend Brian Hurt and I were submitting comic book ideas to Oni Press at the time, and I remember they knew Brian Hurt as an artist, and they knew what he could do, but they didn't know me or what I was capable of. So they asked me to write, because we had pitched them a book called The Damned, and they asked me to write 3 scenes. Like an action scene and a talking head scene and some other scene. They said, could you please just write 3 scenes from it just to see if we can do it, if you can do it. And I wrote those 3 scenes and sent them in, and they immediately after that, they gave us a call and accepted the book. So that was my first, in comics, my first paying gig.
Awesome.
In prose, that had happened. Yeah. Prose had happened earlier on.
Gotcha. Okay. So you were involved pretty early.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm always curious about, what was the first book that you remember seeing on the shelf with your name emblazoned across it? Because that always seems to be kind of a surreal moment, like when you first realize this is real.
Yeah. It was The Damned. For sure, The Damned was the first comic I saw on the shelf with my name on it. Later on, there were moments where I'd go into a comic shop and there were, 6 or 7 books on the new comic rack that I had written. And that was probably a little more surreal for me, going in and seeing that many books on the shelf at one time. But The Damned was the first of my work that I saw on a bookstore shelf.
Awesome. Now, one of the more best things, and I would say you're probably up there as one of the best writers, is your Godzilla work. I very much enjoy those stories so much. How did you get started?
Well,
how did you even get approached? Like, would you like to take a run at the King of All Monsters?
Well, I think it, maybe not in recent years, but at least in the past, I made it pretty clear that I was a big Godzilla fan, that I've just always, I've always loved Godzilla stories, Godzilla movies. I'm just a Godzilla super fan. And years ago, I guess I don't know, somewhere on social media, I was talking about Godzilla, and one of the editors at IDW reached out and said, hey, do you want to try your hand at a Godzilla story? And at that time, I had just signed an exclusive agreement with Marvel, so I couldn't do the book. So I had to turn them down flat because I couldn't do the book at the time. And then when my exclusive agreement at Marvel expired, I emailed that editor again and said, hey, just so you know, I'm free and clear to do Godzilla books. It lingered in my head for those 2 years. It lingered in my head that I, could write a Godzilla comic. So I emailed them and said, hey, I can still do a Godzilla book. They happened to have, space on their slate for that. And they asked me to do, a few short pitches, like paragraph pitches of what I would do. And one of the books I pitched was called Godzilla Cataclysm. And that was my first Godzilla miniseries. I did it with David Wachter, was the artist. And it was a lot of fun. I loved that book. And then, I've just been busy over the years since, but I've always, been reaching out, keeping my name in the hat for Godzilla stories. So a few months, a couple of years ago, IDW reached out again and said, hey, would you be at all interested in a book about Godzilla fighting the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? And of course, I was super excited about that. And yeah, so that was the first thing that was successful enough that it spun off the new series that's running right now, Godzilla versus Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2. And then I've got a few other Godzilla books that have been approved on the list, but I'm not sure where they fall in the slate right now.
Now, with your experience in kind of writing for superheroes and then getting to write for Godzilla, did you find one kind of easier than the other? Because at least Godzilla, you're writing almost on pure animal urge at some point.
Well, I think they kind of play in the same arena to some degree, because superheroes or Godzilla, they're these great powers, right? They're these powers beyond us, and they don't mean as much, in my opinion, without some regular folks in the mix as well. Maybe superheroes, it's a little easier for superheroes because they can, we can get in their head, we can hear what they're thinking, they're talking. While Godzilla, on the other hand, is 1,000% this force of nature, and even Toho has even said, look, don't portray Godzilla as good or evil. Godzilla just is. Godzilla just is. Exactly. So with that, you have to have other characters who kind of play off of Godzilla, which was always the case in all of the movies. There's always the human element is what, is where the story is, and then Godzilla's out, trashing stuff.
Exactly. Now, does it excite you with all the recent? For me, it's not really a reemergence. Godzilla's always been there. It's just about time that everyone finally gave him his recognition and the kaiju series in general. But for you, Is it nice to see that whole universe finally getting its comeuppance back again?
Yeah, it's nice to see people actually paying attention. I think it's interesting. Godzilla movies in the past always had sort of this, people would turn their nose up at Godzilla movies. And then the legendary movies came out and people would turn their nose up at the Japanese Godzilla movies because, these legendary movies are so cool. And it always, I like that they're, Godzilla's getting the attention. It also always irritated me that people would say, the, legendary is so much cooler than the Toho movies. And I'm like, they're cool in their own ways. Let's accept this, that things can be different and still be cool. And then with Godzilla -1, of course, now everybody's like, this is how you, this is cinema on a Toho movie. And again, it's just different in its own way, and it's amazing, but it's just different. And accept that things can be different, because I guarantee all those folks who, turn their nose up at the old Godzilla movies, the original era, and said how stupid they were, I guarantee they like a lot of stupid stuff. I mean, they like other stupid things, I promise. And it's okay to like stupid things.
Oh yeah.
But don't turn your nose up at one stupid thing while you're at the meanwhile you're watching Jersey Shore or something else that's also equally stupid.
Yes, as we tell everyone's got that one movie. Right. Everyone has it. I used to get, we were just talking with my co-host, that's 2E2. Everyone, there's a lot of people that say Blank Man was a terrible movie. I love that movie. It was hilarious, and I will stand by it.
I appreciate your opinion of Blank Man, though I do not share it. And that's
that's okay. That is okay. Now, with all your experience in all these different writing scenarios, do you find yourself preferring to write to like a specific story arc that you find like is kind of your zone, like the hero's journey or a redemption arc? Is there one that just that's like you are in your element when they give you that to kind of plan to go off of?
No, I mean, and most of the time, the publishers don't necessarily give me a plan for things. It's usually like with Godzilla and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they came and they said, "This is the title. What would you do with it?" And then I developed the story, and that is 9 times out of 10 for licensed comics. That's how it works. They'll say, "We want you to write Venom," or "We want you to write X-Men. What would you do?" So I don't know that there's one I prefer them to come to me with. I think, and I don't know that there's one that there's a style of story I necessarily prefer. I do like to write about characters who kind of are morally ambiguous. You don't know if they're, just like what I was talking about with Sinestro. There's no moral ambiguity there, but I like characters who are not necessarily the pristine, gleaming hero. I like characters who maybe do some things you don't like, and maybe make you angry a little bit, but are still. My hope is they're still compelling.
Yeah, I think we can all agree. That's some of the best things. I mean, Injustice was one that everyone's like, "Oh, Superman would never kill," but let's just imagine, what if he did? Who's really honestly going to stop him? That's that, and it could happen. And I want to say that you are seeing more of that come into comics, because it does get boring to read. Batman's on the trail. He beats up the guy. He sends him to Arkham. He'll see him again in 3 months. It's a great story, probably, but it is a routine that I think we're all familiar with.
Right. Yeah. So I think I do lean more towards stories about people in black hats facing off with people in black hats. I like that, but beyond that, I don't necessarily have a big preference in that kind of in one kind of story over the other.
Yeah. Now, given your experience with both big name companies and kind of smaller and independent and creator owned, is it nicer kind of working on creator owned indie just because you have more, I guess, playroom to kind of develop a story and character versus having kind of a defined set, either moral, either good or bad, that someone wants you to work a story off of?
It is. Look, I love the characters in Marvel and DC and all these other characters I write. I love those characters, and I love being able to play in those worlds. For me, though, it is much more rewarding and gratifying to work on my own stories, and it's night and day in terms of the creative process that goes. When you're writing one of your own stories versus writing a story of characters who are owned by someone else. I'm beholden to no one in my own stories, and how those stories shake out is on me. And that's not always the case with, sometimes you have editors and licensors who just say, go with God. But there's always the potential that something's gonna, completely dig up all the track that you've been laying or change the story that you've been writing. A complete 180 of what I've been doing, and that happens much more often in licensed books than say than a creator-owned book.
Awesome. Well, and that kind of brings us, why we're here today is, so you got two books that I'm familiar with. I know we had talked a little bit. You also got a book coming out for Free Comic Book Day. Mm-hmm. Now, the big one that I was very excited was your continuation of the Mighty Power Rangers versus Godzilla 2. That story has been fantastic. And that book is one of the just like Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong. Almost every variant cover that both of those stories have had, they have just nailed the artwork for that story.
Yeah,
It's like spot on.
I haven't even seen all the variant covers. Sometimes I go to a news, an article or something. I'm like, oh, look at those covers. I hadn't seen those yet. Yeah, the covers have been great. It's been a fun book to work on. I'm glad the reception to the first series was strong enough that we were able to do this one.
Now with a series like this, I mean, number one, it's a great story because you can almost have an equal footing fight in both universes just because it exists with giant robots and kaiju. I mean, it goes hand in hand. Is this a storyline that you would like to see kind of go on? Because obviously Power Rangers have been around God knows how long, and some we don't even have in America that are over in
Right.
overseas. Is it a story that you would like to see kind of get more kind of the monster universe involved if you were to kind of carry it on from the storyline?
I already have a plan to continue from where we are right now, and you will see. At this point, one issue's come out, or has two issues come out?
I believe two, because I think I believe I have getting on the pull list, and I got 4 and 5. I just
all right. Well, yeah, I couldn't remember at this point. It's weird for me because I see the books, I've read them already, I've seen them seen the PDFs. So sometimes I don't keep. It doesn't register which ones have come out for real or not. But you'll start seeing the seeds of what I'm trying to do. I've already started, planting those seeds even as early as the first issue of Godzilla versus Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2. And we do some things in this series that I really think I think it will shock some Mighty Morphin Power Rangers fans, and I think it will shock some Godzilla fans, because we're doing things that I never thought either franchise would let us get away with. And these things that we're doing could very easily set up the next series and the next series, and could set up something really big. Now, there's so many moving pieces to it, though, that who knows if that'll ever happen. It couldn't just be, this is a cool story and it's selling well. That's not enough. It's like lightning has to strike in the same spot from multiple directions in order to make it happen. But I'm really, like I said, this is a fun book for me, only because I just never thought we'd be able to pull this off, where this book is going. And there are hints of that already. There are hints of it already. I've seen the Reddit discussions, and I've seen the cover reveals and things like that. So, yes. I'm being secretive right now, but I think most people have seen the things that some of the things at least that we're going to be revealing.
Yeah, I think it was this last issue they just had on the poll list for either issue 4 or issue 5, which looked like each Ranger having their own suit based upon a different friend of Godzilla or different kaiju, which I am hoping that was a true cover, because
I can at least tell you that the covers of this series do reflect the content of the book. So it's not,
oh man,
it's not like the old days where you get a cover that has nothing to do with the story. So the covers of the series do reflect the content of the books.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait then for these next few books to come out. Now, one of the other books that I'm very excited to talk about is Body Bag. And I think that's coming out May 12th, if I have it right in my head. May 12th or 15th, because that's also on my poll list.
I would not count on that date. I'll tell you that right now. I just don't know that that's going to happen.
Okay.
Body Bags Body Bags is an interesting book. it's a very ambitious project. And it's one of those situations where Massive came to me and said, hey, we'd love to do a book that you do something like this. And I took it and ran with it. And maybe I ran with it more than they anticipated. I don't know. But there have been a lot of delays on getting that book finished. A lot of delays. It's been written forever. And Body Bags, the conceit of Body Bags is it starts out, it's a horror, a horror one shot. But the book is, I may be describing this a little wrong, but close. The book is sealed, like polybagged. And you don't, and there are 4 different versions of the story. 4 different versions, 4 different monsters in the book. So the book, there are 4 very different versions of the story that have some loose connection with each other. And you don't know which one you're getting when you buy the book. So when you pick it up, you don't know what monster story you're getting. You don't know what cover you're getting. You know nothing about what's in the polybag. It's almost like a variant interior. It's like a variant. They're variant comics, and you don't know which one you're getting. And art's been rolling in. The book looks amazing. Giancarlo Fernando has been doing the art, and the book looks amazing. And the monsters that have been designed, because these are 4 new monsters. It's not like this one's a vampire and this one's a werewolf. No, these are completely different monsters, completely weird. The stories kind of start in the same place, and then it's almost like a what if this happens instead. All that said, though, it's not ready. There's no way it comes out in May. I mean, there's just not. I don't know when it will come out, but there is no way it comes out in May. But it's been on the solicit. It was supposed to come out in October, and then delays on the publishing side. I still have high hopes that readers will get this book, because it is a cool premise, and I think what John and I have done is just cool. I mean, it's just they're cool stories. But as far as when it comes out, I don't have any control of that at this point. All I can do is rattle the cage doors and say, "Come on, let's move it on." But there have been just some painful delays on the book. So I'm actually a little surprised that it's solicited again for May 12th, because I think it just gets resolicited and resolicited and resolicited. And I don't think we're anywhere close to seeing that book on the shelves, which is
the good
frustrating.
News is, at least it's out there and it's on Polis. So I know it's in the works.
It's in the works. It's the frustrating part of it is I don't write. Some writers can write stories, and they're completely content that it never comes out. They wrote it, they got paid for it, but that's not how I'm wired. I want people to read these stories. So it's frustrating for me when the stories don't come out or come out when they're supposed to.
Definitely. Now, what was it like? I mean, from the sounds of it, then you wrote 4 individual stories with, as you said, loose tie-ins. Was that easier said than done, or was there kind of ideas for these monsters that you had been kicking around for quite a while?
No, all of the monsters came together after I started working on the project. It was a difficult book to write, because I had a certain, because like I said, the books start in the same place. So there are pages where they're the same, but then panels start changing. And the books start changing, even a panel is different on this page. And then on some issues, the entire pages are different. And I had to write all of that. I had to have like a roadmap of the elements that were going to change in each issue, and where they were going to change. Doing that was not a simple book to write. And like I said, some of it I probably did to myself, but it's not a matter of, one page is different. The story
Yeah.
changes as the books go along. And then I had the brilliant idea that I was going to connect them too, and that added another level of complexity to scripting it and making sure all the pieces work together well. And it was a fun project to write, but it was definitely not as easy as I thought it was going to be going into it.
Yeah. I like a picture as a wall where it just starts like a family tree and then there's just string theory and it just starts threading.
It was very much like that. It was definitely a lot of pieces moving around and moving, it was like, positioning Tetris blocks in order to make it work.
Now, is this I don't want to say funner project for you, but kind of a little bit more rewarding is that it's kind of a break from the normal kind of comic book genre of hero versus villain and telling like a horror story where there's not really a hero or villain sometimes in the story.
Well, I write a lot of horror fiction, a lot of horror stories. I mean, that's probably my genre of preference is horror stuff. So this was fun on, in that respect. And I probably lean more into writing horror books these days than any other genre. So it's a little, the non-horror stuff is a little more unusual maybe these days.
Awesome. So now what can you tell us about your comic that's coming out for Free Comic Book Day?
It's a non-horror comic.
Oh man.
But so I am doing a book for Mad Cave based on the animated series Gatchaman, which I don't know how many people are familiar with Gatchaman. Some people of my age will remember having watched the cartoon Battle of the Planets or G-Force when they were a kid. And Battle of the Planets and G-Force were Americanized versions of the Japanese cartoon Gatchaman. But I am writing the Gatchaman series. It's an ongoing series. It's about the science ninja team, 5 ninjas with special training and special technique that fly around the world in the superjet fighting giant mecha and struggling against the machinations of this terrorist organization called Galactor. And I'm writing the ongoing series. There are going to be a number of spin-off series that other writers are writing. Like Tommy Lee Edwards is writing some, and Steve Orlando's writing some. And our first issue, the 0 issue, is going to come out on Free Comic Book Day. So it'll be at your stores when you go in there to get your free books. Gatchaman 0. These are not excerpt stories, so it's not stories that you're going to be able to get when the first issue comes out. These are new stories to introduce readers to the Gatchaman world. But it's a lot of fun. It's got everything. It's got a little bit, when I think about it, it's definitely got some Power Rangers, or Power Rangers has some Gatchaman in its DNA because these ninjas they've got cool costumes and they've got cool techniques. And then it's got, some giant monster to it because Galactor loves to sick these giant mecha, on the unsuspecting populace. And it's got some interesting environmental commentary, and it's just a lot of fun. The cartoon, the animated series ran for many years, and the licensor has given us a lot of leeway to create new story elements that play that are official canon to the Gatchaman reality. So it's a lot of fun on that respect. But yeah, it's a cool series. It's been super cool to write about these, science ninjas fighting terrorist organizations, and it's just been a lot of fun. And then the spin-off stuff that Tommy Lee Edwards and Steve Orlando are doing are just they're such good stories. But yeah, this 0 issue comes out on Free Comic Book Day. And that's a great jumping on point. If you miss it, you can still get into issue 1 and still understand what's going on in the world of Gatchaman. But these are new. The stories in the 0 issue are new stories.
That's awesome. And yeah, I'm familiar with it because my dad showed me growing up. He's like, you're gonna love this. It was between that and Speed Racer. We watched quite a bit of that. Now,
Battle of the Planets was, Battle of the Planets was sort of the Americanized version, and it was a lot. Gatchaman was a little more violent and a little more adult, maybe, than Battle of the Planets. But yeah. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Now, what was it like? I mean, oh no, you're good. What was it like on kind of a nostalgic kind of hero getting like that? Those keys again, for most of us, it's like someone that's a Batman fan saying, "All right, you can now draw Batman." Here it's just like, "All right, this is this old TV show. Here you go. These are some simple rules, but write a good story."
Yeah, it's pretty cool, to be honest, because these are characters that my friends and I used to pretend to be on the playground. We used to play, to a degree, these are the characters, because we used to play Battle of the Planets, but we used to play and argue about who was the coolest, member of the team and things like that. And so now getting to tell the stories about, the story of these characters on my own, it's like I've been preparing for this since I was in, first grade. I've been gearing up to write a Gatchaman series.
Destiny had you trained. And
That's right.
It's funny that you got to write this, and then doing Godzilla versus Power Rangers 2, I feel like it was just like a perfect set of kind of writing the story. I don't know if you felt like you saw a lot of interlay between the two stories.
Well, yeah,
it inspired you.
Yeah, it is, because with both of these, I'm pulling on some of the things I felt, the things I really loved about the Gatchaman cartoon. I'm trying to get that across in the comic, and then with Godzilla versus Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, I'm really trying to pull on specific eras of Godzilla and make it feel like, certain eras of Godzilla. It's much more influenced by the Showa era of Godzilla, which was a little more, it was a little more cartoony and maybe a little more goofball, but on the Godzilla side. But that's what feels right when he's facing off against, when the Power Rangers are involved too. So it's nice to have, that background and to be able to pull on those, because, with Godzilla, I'm probably more of a fan of the Heisei era of Godzilla, but it's nice to be able to reference and lean into the stuff that I loved when I was a little younger too. Because I wanted, for Godzilla, both of these books I think are pretty. Gatchaman and Godzilla versus Mighty Morphin Power Rangers are both pretty easy books for even for an adult to read, and that's great. But a kid could pick these up and enjoy. I want kids to be able to read these books and enjoy them too, and that's one of the things that I'm kind of leaning into with both of them. I want it to be, a lot of people say, "Oh, all ages," that means kids, and that's not what it means. All ages means all ages can enjoy the book, and that's what I want to lean into with both of these titles.
Definitely. So for this comic book, it will be on Free Comic Book Day, which is coming up May 4th, I believe. Yeah,
yes,
May the 4th.
May 4th. Yeah, it's a special confluence of events.
Yes. And it will be labeled then as Gatchaman issue 0.
It's Gatchaman issue 0. Yeah.
Awesome as well. Everyone be on the lookout for that. One final question before we kind of wrap things up. And I always like to ask every writer, artist, for anyone listening, comics and getting into the comic industry, even a fan, it's not a linear path. Everyone has their own way of getting there, where they're at. If you had to share one piece of advice that took you longer to learn, just from kind of starting out, what would be that one piece of advice that could kind of speed up someone's progress for writing comics?
Well, like you said, it's not linear and everybody does it differently, but I do think I think a constant, at least in my friends who've broken into comics. And I feel like this is true whether your end goal is to do creator-owned books or your end goal is to do Marvel and DC. First of all, don't waste your time pitching Marvel and DC. It is a literal waste of your effort because that's not how it works. But what you can do is just create your own comic. Find and these days more than ever, don't wait for permission to do a comic. I waited for permission from somebody. I would submit and get rejections when I should have just created a comic as an adult. And I should have found an artist. I should have figured out a way to get the comic book printed. I should have gotten it out there, because when you create your own comic that is 100% unique to you, it speaks to who you are. And you can use that comic to get open doors. It's what I did with, I did The Damned and I did The Sixth Gun, and I got those books into the hands of editors at other publishing companies. And they liked the books and they started reaching out to me to offer me work. And that's the way to do it. But even, I waited for a publisher to pick up The Damned. I didn't, maybe I needed to, but these days you don't even need to do that. I mean, there's crowdfunding, there's 1,000 web comics. There's so many ways to get your books out there and get them read that don't involve you begging for permission from someone else. You don't have to do that. You might need to find an artist, or maybe if you're an artist, draw it yourself or whatever. But you definitely can put something out without those things, and then use that comic that you published as if that's all you want to do, then that's great. You've done it. Keep doing it. But if you really want to get in at other publishers, you can use that comic as almost like a business card and say, this is something I created. Because at Marvel or DC, for instance, those editors aren't going to read your pitches. They simply will not. But they might pay attention to a comic you send them as a PDF, or send them a copy, or hand them a copy at a convention. They might pay attention to that.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. That actually rings true for the panel at C2E2 that had Katie Couric and I think it was Gene Hodge, Chip Zdarsky. They said the exact same thing. So for everyone listening, get out there and do it. I want to thank you for your time today and joining us, answering our questions. Everyone be on the lookout for Godzilla vs. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2. We have our comic book for Free Comic Book Day, Gatchaman 0 issue. We'll be looking forward to Body Bag, depending on when it releases.
It'll come out some point. At some point, yeah.
At some point. If anyone is interested in finding you and keeping up to date with what you're doing, where are the best places to follow you?
So I'm on all the socials as, Cullen Bunn. But if you go to my website, cullenbunn.com, you can get to everything that you need to get to. You can get to my I have a Discord channel you can get to. I have a Patreon. I have a newsletter that I put out weekly that is full of, interesting tidbits and a lot of news. So you can subscribe to that from the website. But that's the place to go to get into everything.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. Everyone, be on the lookout for those comic books. And we look forward to reading and reviewing them.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right, everyone, have a good day.